So it's been a strange year in all of sport, not least snooker, which finds itself based in Milton Keynes for now and the foreseeable future, I guess. But it's time we caught up with Rich Mann and discussed it. Rich, hello. First of all, it has been a strange run. We've been based in Milton Keynes. It's had various effects on various players, I suppose, which we'll get to. But what a job they've done, World Snooker, to get us this far, to basically miss nothing. We even got a World Championships in the middle of summer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Very commendable efforts all around, really. I mean, if you think back 6 months, sport in general was decimated and snooker's really led the way, actually. I thought the World Championship was done really well. The fact that they were able to get some fans in for that final, I know it was only a couple of hundred, but I think it made a difference. And for all it's felt like Groundhog Day sometimes at Milton Keynes, I think they've done a good job. They've made each tournament stand alone, if you like, as well as they could have hoped to do anyway. And I think we're just all very grateful. We've had some terrific snooker. I think that's the most important thing to say. We've had some really good finals, 147s. We had another one yesterday with Judd Trump. So it's all good. I think we're all looking forward to getting fans back in watching all sport. But for now, this will have to do. And I think they've done a good job, World Snooker.
They certainly have. Looking back into the World Championships just briefly, because we are many months removed from it now, but I think a lot of people would put that semi-final between Ronnie and Mark Selby in their top, maybe in their top one matches actually, but certainly right up there in the best matches they've seen. Where does it rank for you? And were you surprised by what happened? Because obviously Selby had the match there to be won. He looked like he'd done a job on Ronnie, and I guess it just shows when Ronnie does get his mind together, and maybe that little extra motivation, incentive, whatever you want to call it, for playing someone you respect so highly as he does Mark. But either way, whatever the reasons, we got an absolute cracker. Yeah,
no, one for the ages. And let's not forget, I think what built up to that semi-final was because we just had the epic match between Kyren Wilson and Anthony McGill in the afternoon. And we kind of needed a breather, really. And we probably thought, well, someone will win this second semi quite easy and we can finally relax. And then obviously Ronnie did what he did and produced that magical late shot. It was a great semi-final. I think in terms of a day of snooker, I can't remember anything like it. I know I was talking to Neal Robertson for his column a few weeks ago. He said he can't remember anything like it at the Crucible or anywhere else. It was just fantastic, and Ronnie really produced when he needed it. A real champion came out of it. I know Mark was a little bit disappointed with Ronnie's attitude. I think when Mark tried to turn it into a bit of a grind and get tactical, he was clearly outplaying Ronnie. And Ronnie was having none of it. He was happy to sort of forgo those frames, if you like, just to keep in rhythm and keep his scoring side of his game going. And I know Mark was disappointed, but from Ronnie, it was all about winning, and he got over the line and he won that 6th world title. So all credit to him.
Yeah, it's a brilliant performance. So we didn't have a lot of time, obviously, to reflect and react. Obviously, usually after the World Championships, the top players at least have a good few months off, and even those further down the rankings get a few weeks at the very least. So in a strange way, I guess it allowed people like Mark and Kyren Wilson, even Judd Trump, who will have been disappointed with his title defence, not to go for, he expects to be in pretty much every final now, doesn't he? It allowed those guys, I guess, to just get back on the bike almost, because if you look at what's happened since, we've had, 4 ranking tournaments which have finished since the World's finished. And the winners of those, Mark Selby, Kyren Wilson, Judd Trump, and even Mark Allen, who, of course, went out in the first round at the Crucible. So 4 of the guys who had the most reason to be disappointed from what happened in Sheffield have come out and put it behind them pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think for Kyren, it's been really big, actually, the disappointment of losing that final, what would have been a first world title. I know he's gone on record as saying it'd be a dream come true for him. So I was pleased to see him get that ranking title in the Championship League, the first on home soil as well. And I think probably Mark Selby falls into that category as well. I mean, like you were saying, he was bitterly disappointed to lose that match to Ronnie. But he was back, and I think he's run with that momentum. He won the European Masters, a couple more semis. Probably unlucky not to reach another final, really. But he's certainly run with that momentum. And then even further down, someone like John Higgins actually played really well at Sheffield. Kurt Mafflin beat him in a good quality match there. And he's looked good again this season. So I think those guys have run with the momentum. Others less so, actually. Someone like, we'll get onto him in a minute, but Yang Bingtao's been very quiet so far. We expected more from him. And Ronnie himself's been quite quiet, although I get the sneaking suspicion that he's coming nicely to the boil now.
In terms of the snooker that they've played, obviously we often talk, or we have done in the past, about how demanding a season it is now in snooker. Under a typical year, there's a lot of travel, a lot of events that run into the back of each other. Typically this time of year, we have the busy period we've again got with the UK running into Scotland and things like that. Obviously, it's been a bit lighter this year in some respects. No trips to China and things like that. But then on the other hand, I suppose, mentally, if not physically, quite grueling for some players to keep going back to the same arena, the same snooker table, playing, entering the bubble, as we'll say. And I thought in watching Neal Robertson, who, hours before we recorded this, lost to Ben Wollaston in the Northern Ireland Open, which of course, again, was in Milton Keynes, he just looked a little bit like he'd had enough. And that will be the case with some players. I suppose with Neal, it might be the case that he actually benefits at the UK Championship, which we'll come to. But definitely seems like some players have just had these shockingly bad performances, which seem out of the blue, and yet probably something to do with the unique circumstances they find themselves in.
Yeah, I think going forward, we've got a really packed calendar now, haven't we? We go straight into the UK after the Northern Ireland Open. Then we've got the Scottish straight after that. Then we've got the World Grand Prix. And I know Neil Foulds, again, he mentioned it last week. These same guys can't keep winning under these circumstances, in the bubble, stuck in the hotel rooms, apart from when they're playing the matches. It's got to take its toll on them. And I think, as you were saying there, Neil, it certainly showed with Neal Robertson last night. I think when we saw Judd losing to Mark Allen in the Champion of Champions semis, albeit he lost to the champion, but he was a shadow of what we've seen of Judd for the rest of the season. And his interview was really telling afterwards. He said, I just wanted to get out of there. It's hard work in this bubble and it's taken its toll. And I think for punters and fans, we've got to be mindful of that. It's going to be really hard work for them.
Let's move on to talk specifically about some of those players then. I think pretty much everyone has had an up and down season to some degree. Even, Mark Selby we'll speak about in a minute, who's produced some brilliant performances in the European Masters final and various early rounds performances, which have been the Mark Selby of old, if you like. And then he goes and loses 4-0 to Lucas Kleckers in the Northern Ireland Open. So I think we have to accept that volatility. But let's talk about, we've got some power rankings now. So your top 5 performers from 2020 so far. We'll do them in reverse order. Who have you got at 5?
So I've gone for Kyren Wilson. A couple of contenders for number 5, I suppose. But I've been really impressed with Kyren. It could have been a real body blow to lose that World Final. But to come back, win the Championship League, he's been pretty consistent, a couple more quarterfinals. He's going well at the time of recording in Northern Ireland. So I've been pleased to see him show that. I felt we could have a hangover from Kyren at the start of this season, but there doesn't look to be a bit of it. So I'd expect him to have a good couple of months going forward.
Any regrets from him, do you think, watching that second semi-final? I know they would never admit it, and I know probably as a kid growing up, his dream was actually to beat Ronnie O'Sullivan in the World Championship final, and he had the chance to do that. Any regrets looking back now that Selby couldn't have done the hard work for him, and then maybe he'd have had more of a chance against Mark, or at least been in a game where maybe the styles match up a bit better, and he would have felt like the favourite, whether he would have been or not. Obviously, Mark's experience winning 3 world titles would have probably earned him that tag with the bookmakers, but Kyren would have probably felt he was less of an underdog.
Yeah, you know what? I think as regrets go, I think more likely will be that Saturday night. I know you were blogging for that part of the final, and Kyren really had Ronnie on the run at the end of that session. I can't remember precisely, but Ronnie won a frame. I think Kyren got a kick, and he could have really reduced the deficit there. As it was, Ronnie got out of that session. He was all over the place, but got out in front. And you felt that for Kyren, the title was lost there. And I wonder if he looks back at that point of the match and thinks that was where it was lost. And I think the story goes that Ronnie was the first one at the Crucible the next morning, banging on the door, let me in, wanted some practice time, realised his game hadn't been good enough on the Saturday. And then, of course, he played brilliantly that Sunday and was a deserving winner. But I wonder if Kyren will look back at that moment on Saturday night and he had Ronnie on the run a little bit there, and I think if he could have just got a bit closer to him, who knows?
Bigger picture, though, obviously he's already established himself, and he had done before the summer as a real Crucible specialist. It's to his credit that he's gone there every year and performed. I know he has suffered some disappointing defeats, the one at Higgins a couple of years ago, and the manner of his defeat to Ronnie, he would have liked to have put up more of a fight on Sunday. But bigger picture, when we roll around to Sheffield, increasingly Kyron's one of those guys you just have to look at and plot his draw and expect him to win a lot of those tight games in rounds 2 and 3 as well.
Yeah, I've probably been more critical of Kyron than most actually, but like you say, when it comes down to Sheffield, I was very keen on him this year. I thought he'd have a good run, and I think the key to him has been his cue ball, and it hasn't been good enough, but it's definitely improved. He's pretty much where he wants it to be now. He's just got a fantastic appetite for the game and for practice. And while he's like that, you just think he's going to keep getting better and better. And yeah, he's going to be a big player at Sheffield next year, I'm sure.
So who's number 4? Who's number 4 in these power rankings?
I've gone for Mark Allen, actually. Bit of a strange one, this, though. Very sort of licorice all sorts, if you like. Not had the best of the season, then went to the Champion of Champions and was absolutely brilliant. Beat Ronnie, Judd, Neal Robertson in the final. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that, does it? I think we've all said for a while his game and his scoring has warranted him winning more titles than he's managed to pick up in the last 18 months. So it was a welcome return to the winners' enclosure, if you like. He's going well in the Northern Ireland Open now. I'm sure he's benefiting from it not being in Belfast this year, and that just relieving a little bit of pressure on his shoulders. He just looks a fantastic player to me, and I think he's going to be the one, I think, maybe to put it up to Judd and Neal, and when Ronnie's maybe not as tuned in as he needs to be. I think Mark's probably the emerging threat to sort of Judd and Ronnie and Neal Robertson, I would say now.
So Neil Fold's writing for us now, gladly, and his columns are on the website if you want to catch up with those. He spoke a lot about Mark after that Champion of Champions win. It's kind of an ironic win, I guess, because it'd been a couple of years since he'd won a tournament, but he managed to qualify for the Champion of Champions. And as you said, the form of that event is as strong as it gets. But where do you stand on this debate, whether he does have the game? Because I know Stephen Hendry certainly willing to be critical, which is great, what you want from a pundit in his position, obviously very, very well qualified, doesn't quite think Mark is where he needs to be in terms of becoming a world champion. I know we're talking about the UK Championship really here, but where do you stand on that? In 10 years, do we look back on Mark Allen, the world champion, or Mark Allen, the person who failed to just bridge that gap?
I mean, looking at his game, I felt for a while he's got the game, he can scrap, he's a good safety game, fabulous temperament, scores well. He looks to have everything in his armoury, but there's clearly something in this not doing very well at Sheffield. His record there is poor, really, for someone of his calibre. And it's not easy to win. I mean, for whatever reason, if he isn't comfortable at the Crucible, it's going to be a big hurdle for him to get over. But just looking at Mark Allen, the snooker player, I mean, he's got it all. I suppose the other thing to say on that, so has Neal Robertson, and he's struggled at the Crucible more recently. I know he's a former winner, but more recently it hasn't suited him. Even Ronnie, until last year, he'd found it tough going there as well. So it's not easy. Whether he's able to do it, I suppose only time will tell. But just from a snooker point of view, there doesn't look to be any weaknesses in his armoury.
So Mark Allen, he'll certainly go to the UK Championships as one of the form players and one of the title contenders. Who's number 3 in the power rankings?
Yeah, I've gone for Mark Selby despite his galling defeat.
We don't have to talk about it. It's fine.
To Lucas Kleckers. Look, Mark, he's back. You know, regardless of the result last night, he won the European Masters. 2 semi-finals to defeats to Neal Robertson, both in final frame deciders. Those could have gone either way. I think he was unlucky in both, personally speaking, but he certainly could have won one of them. And he's just back. He's playing really well. He's scoring again, and I felt like he'd lost the knack of winning those tight matches, but he looks to have that back. You'd think he'd be a threat at the UK's and the Masters, although we've said that for the last few years, and that hasn't actually happened. But looking ahead to Sheffield, there's some 10-1 floating around for the World Championship, and if he keeps playing as he has been doing, to me, just to take a racing term, he improves the stone when he gets to Sheffield in the longer matches. If he turns up in Sheffield in the sort of form he's in right now, or he has been this season, he's got to be a massive player. I know, obviously, we don't know the draw or anything like that, but I just can't believe he'd be 10-1 come the sort of start of that event. I'm talking myself into doing an anti-post angle here, but look, he's playing really well, and it's good to see, actually, because he's been a sort of a modern champion of our game, really, and quite sad to sort of watch him over the last few years, almost like battling his demons. I know he's working with Chris Henry, you know, a renowned coach, worked with Sean Murphy, and it seems to be working for him. So, you know, fingers crossed he can keep it going. And yeah, I've definitely got him on my radar for Sheffield already.
Right, I'm going to take a stab at these last two in your power rankings. I'm going to assume Judd Trump gets in at number one. There'll be some inquest held if that's not the case. At number two, it's Ronnie or Robertson, but I'm guessing given that Ronnie's form has been patchy away from that brilliant win at the Crucible, are we talking Neal Robertson number two?
Yeah, we are. Just a model of consistency. I mean, again, at the time of recording this, he's lost to Ben Wollaston for the second time in a week last night. But brilliant efforts to get to the Champion of Champions final and the English Open final. The English Open final with Judd was a real cracker. He was in front sort of in that evening session, really, and will probably feel like he should have won. But Judd played brilliantly, as he has done all season and all last season. And then Neal played great again to get to the Champions final and ran into an on-song Mark Allen. Just a model of consistency, brilliant break builder, dead straight cue action. You look at him now, Neal, and when these big events come around, you just think he's going to be a threat everywhere. Like you, I do worry sometimes with him about burnout. I do think that might be a factor that when he gets to Sheffield, it's why we've not seen him at his best for the last couple of years. But up until then, he'd be well on my radar. He sort of masters those sort of things. I think the issue with him, and we saw it last year as well, if he plays well for a month or so, back-to-back events, I think he got to those three finals, didn't he? Sort of turn of the new year last year. He tends to taper off a little bit. It can take its toll on him, and it takes him a little while to get back. Now, whether he's busy early season, takes its toll going forward for the next few weeks, who knows? But you think a Christmas break, something like the Masters, he could be absolutely primed for that. Fantastic player, and he continues to play really well.
Finally, then, Judd Trump. I mean, what more can we say about him? He's well on his way. I know our contributor Nick Metcalf has been discussing this on Twitter, whether he is already an all-time great. I think people are naturally reluctant to crown people before their careers are finished. But actually, with Judd, I mean, if he continues to play as he is now, it's a question of how many world titles he ends his career with, how many Masters, how many UK championships, how many ranking titles, how many century breaks, and breaking records which are held by Ronnie O'Sullivan, who's top of the game since the age of 17 to his mid-40s now, is always going to be difficult. We can't just hand out world titles to someone who what's just 30 now, 31 maybe. He's only just won his first. So, to win 8 or 7, it's going to be hard. But the standard of snooker he is playing now is surely of a standard we've seldom seen. I mean, he's just a joy to watch, isn't he?
Yeah, he's got to be right up there. I've thought about this myself long and hard, but if he's not great at the game, then I think we're setting the barometer very high, aren't we? I mean, he got the record last year, didn't he, for 6 ranking titles. I know there's more titles nowadays, but you've still got to go and win them. I think the thing for Judd will be last year, he was really poor in the Triple Crown events. A decent run at Sheffield, but, lost to Nigel Bond in the UK. Didn't go as far as he would have liked at the Masters. I think those tournaments this year he'll be really eyeing up. Be interesting to see how he goes at the UK next week. Obviously, the Masters forthcoming, but you just look at this season: English Open winner, semis of the European Masters, champion of champions semi-final, Championship League final, lost to Kyron, who played really well. I mean, if he gets through the opening couple of games, which he's managing to do so at the moment, the nearer the back end of the events he goes, the harder he is to stop. He's just a phenomenon, really. Just a fantastic player. I mean, at the time of recording yesterday, he made a 147. It was just pure poetry to watch. A few years ago, I think we would have always said he probably didn't have the cue ball of a Ronnie or a Ding, but his putting's always been amazing, that he's been able to get him out of trouble. But even now, his cue ball's just so good. He's maybe not in Ronnie's league, but I mean, his cue ball's so good now. He's got a rock solid temperament, and if he carries on with this appetite to keep winning titles, then people are going to struggle to stop him. He's just that far clear of everyone else.
It was a remarkable run of winning ranking finals that came to an end actually in the Championship League, but I think we can probably put an asterisk by that. A best of 5 ranking final is unique. Over the longer format, when there's a trophy on the line, he's been unbeatable for a while now, and that, I suppose, that speaks to his. I think he is one of those who's motivated by winning, isn't he? I know that sounds obvious for any elite sportsman, but he's really enjoyed the challenge of being world champion and carrying on and kicking on and showing that he can go to Gibraltar and he can go to China and Germany and everywhere else and still come home with titles and still, maintain a high level of form. Maybe being a bit younger helps, I don't know, but he doesn't seem one, for all he'll throw in a bad performance along the line like they all do, he doesn't really seem one who you worry about the burnout factor, as you were talking with Neal.
No, and just sort of picking up on the point you made there, I think what seems to set him apart for me is he's very good at just brushing off a poor performance. If he loses, I remember last year he lost in the Champion of Champions final to Neal, another great match that those two served up. And he should have won that match, but his post-match interview was really good, all class really, very dignified. And you felt that's got to hurt and that's got to leave its mark going forward. And it didn't really, he just kept on winning. And that's the mark of him. He's able to just brush off that bad performance and come back and win again. He doesn't seem to get battle scarred like he maybe would have done a few years ago. He's a man now, I guess, and he certainly shows on the snooker table. I think Ronnie actually, when he won the English Open, I think Ronnie described him as a beast on the snooker table, and I thought that was a really good way to describe him because I've interviewed him a few times, Judd. Lovely guy, really friendly, and he's sort of infectious enthusiasm for the game, really shines through. But clearly, when you get him on that snooker table, he is a beast. And yeah, he's just going to keep winning.
He's got that mentality. I don't know what it is, whether it comes from sports psychologists. But I've noticed a few times when you watch him have a shocker, which they all do, a lot of the time you sort of feel sorry for whoever is interviewing him on Eurosport. They'll say, Joe, for whatever reason, it wasn't happy today. He didn't seem to play your best. And I said, I played pretty well, actually, but the other guy just played better. And he's very, very good at, like you say, moving on or not beating himself up over things that don't go his way. I suppose that becomes easier when you're winning more often than not. But yeah, without a doubt, the standout player of 2020, and that's despite not performing as well as he would have liked in the major event. I'm sure that will change in the not too distant future. So they're the 5 most impressive performers at the top of the sport. Is there anyone who's caught your eye as well from maybe further down the rankings, who is someone who's impressed you with the way they've played? Maybe some signs that they've thrived in Milton Keynes even. I'm sure there's some players who are actually up their performances for playing on the same arena every week.
Yeah, I'll probably just chuck 3 in very briefly. Regular readers of my content will know I'm a big fan of John Higgins anyway, and I think he's played really well this year without getting the results he deserves. He probably feel he should have beat Judd in the English Open semis, but he doesn't seem to be able to get past Judd at the moment. But aside from that, he played well without really winning. He should have beat Ding at the Champion of Champions, and I'd have fancied him to have a deep run there. He's still going well in the Northern Ireland Open now, the time of speaking. Touch wood that I'm saying the same tomorrow morning. So I think John can win another title again. I think it's a question that we're all asking at his age. Has he got another win in him? I think he definitely has. Another one I'll chuck in actually lower down the rankings, and I'm a big fan of this guy. Wan Sejong completely dropped off the last sort of 8 months, but he's having a good run at the Northern Ireland Open, beat Tom Ford yesterday. And I've just noticed over the last few weeks, his results are starting to pick up again. I still think he needs to score heavier. But look, he's a young guy, and I'm hoping he's learnt plenty and he's turned the corner again. And then the obvious one, if we're talking about winning, is Ding ahead of his UK Championship defence next week. I've been really impressed with Ding this year. Just bubbling away, and I hope he's coming to the boil nicely now. Again, going okay in the Northern Ireland Open. I'm not saying he'll win the Northern Ireland Open. I suspect he probably won't. But I didn't think he had too bad a draw for the UK, as he's still 20s. And he likes the bigger stage, if you like. I sometimes wonder if these Home Nations events don't suit him. If he's not on the TV table, he could be out on table number 4. That's not for Ding. Look, I know he's still going to be in Milton Keynes and he'll still have to get through the earlier rounds. But if he can do that, spurred on by defending his title, I think he could be a real big player in York. And then obviously further afield, we've got some big events coming up, the World Grand Prix, the Masters, things like that. So I think he'll be winning again soon, Ding. Whether it's at York, I'm not so sure, but he's definitely on my radar.
And he's one of those who's got a good draw for York. We'll come to that in a moment or two. But let's just briefly touch on a couple of players against whose names there are red flags or whatever. I'll give you Shaun Murphy. He did make a 1-4-7 last week, didn't he, in the German Masters qualifying rounds? But if you look at his form this year, he's lost 4-2 to David Gilbert in the Champions first round, and Gilbert's not really raised the gallop otherwise. He lost 4-3 to David Lilley at the English Open. That was in round 2, and he lost 4-0 to Ryan Day, a resurgent Ryan Day, one of those who you'd marked out as one to keep a fairly close eye on this year. Again, in the Northern Ireland Open in Milton Keynes. I wonder whether with Shaun, he's one of those, obviously there are players from China with greater problems in terms of the travel and the being away from home, but now Shaun's based in Dublin, maybe being holed up in a hotel in Milton Keynes appeals less to him than it would even someone like Judd or Ronnie, who don't have to get on a plane and things like that.
Yeah, and I think Mark Allen was laughing about this the other day. Apparently, Shaun hadn't even realised that he could get exemption from the lockdown. Being a professional sportsman, he could get out and practice. I don't think Shaun actually realised that, so he was holding himself up at home when he was back in Dublin, when he could have been practising a little bit more. I wonder if the busier period now, if he bases himself in Milton Keynes before Christmas, might actually help him be in that bubble and just practice. We might see a bit of an improvement, but he's definitely not playing to his capabilities. I fancied him for the Worlds actually in the summer, and he went out early, really disappointing there. The other name we'll throw in is Jack Lazowski, who, barring a run to the final of the Scottish Open last season, has had an absolutely wretched run, and he's continued this season. He's not made the third round yet so far this season of any tournament. I don't know what to put it down to. I really thought he turned a corner at the Scottish last year, but for all his talent, he's just going the wrong way at the moment. So I'd have serious concerns about him. Look, you're probably not thinking about him to win major tournaments, but sort of first, second, third round matches, he's generally favourite unless he comes up against a big gun. People fear him, but he's getting turned over regular. So he's definitely one to look at in these little sub-markets. And I don't know, you might come up against a journeyman or someone who would be underrated and is able to turn him over. Much the same way this week, actually, with David Gilbert would be another who was struggling. Came up against David Grace in the first round of the Northern Ireland Open. Gilbert was heavily odds on, but Grace has been playing well this year. Gilbert hasn't, and Grace being comfortably. I think it was 4-1. It should have been 4-0. So those, just for punters, those are little things to just keep an eye on. Yang Bingtao, much the same, actually, really struggling for results, but has picked up at the Northern Ireland Open, and I just wonder now we get into the stage where we're going to have some longer matches, whether he'll come into his own there. So I won't be giving up on Yang just yet.
No, nor me. So let's come to the UK Championships then. The draw, I think, was made a week or so ago. The notable thing, because as we speak, it's possible we get a third renewal of the Judd versus Ronnie final in Northern Ireland. But they're in the same half of the draw for the UK. So that immediately, I think everybody who bets outright on snooker will either say, well, I'll take the slightly bigger price than I would have got about Judd. And I think there will be a lot of people who say 3-1, 7-2 about Judd Trump. Yeah, I'll happily take that for all that he's not been at his best in the Triple Crown event since he last won one of them last April. The other thing a lot of people do is just immediately go to that other half of the draw. You've already mentioned Ding, who's at the top of the draw. I think Allen and John Higgins are in the same quarter. The second quarter, you've got Mark Selby, Barry Hawkins, Neal Robertson, Jan himself, and Wan Sejun, another name that you've mentioned. But they're at the bottom, I suppose, that the concern would. Well, for me, it looked like actually some of those guys we have worries about are actually in the bottom. And those worries are going to be exacerbated by being in there with Ronnie and Judd. So, one name would be, I think, Graham Dott. Stuart Bingham is in the bottom half. For these guys to go and win the UK Championship, it looks a big hill to climb in that draw.
It does, and Ronnie sat right at the bottom there. It will strike the fear of God into the lots of them. It's a bit of a conundrum with Ronnie. I mean, he usually tailors his season around the UK. He's a record holder now, but part of that is because he loves York, and it usually sits nicely in the calendar. I have some time to prepare before going up to York, as it would be, but not the same this year. If he has a deep run in Northern Ireland, he's not going to have very much time out of the bubble before we're in Milton Keynes again for the start of the UK. So it takes on a different look to it this year, and I'm finding it a little bit harder to sort of get my head around just from that perspective. And again, Judd's going well at the Northern Ireland Open. If he has a deep run, going for his third consecutive Northern Ireland Open win, could he suffer a bit of burnout there? Or maybe not burnout, but it's a 2-week tournament, the UK. It's a long old slog, and that'll be 3 weeks of snooker. They had the German Masters qualifying before the Northern Ireland Open as well. It's just a concern. It's another thing for people to weigh up. And I think for Ronnie and Judd, who are going well in the Northern Ireland Open, I'd probably be holding my bets to just see how deep they go and worry. For Ronnie in particular, I've never thought a long slog is what he wants. It's why he's not thrived at the World Championship more recently. So the thought of essentially having 3 weeks pretty much in a biosecure bubble, it would be a little bit off-putting for me.
Was Mark Selby's performance so troubling against Lucas Klecker that you wouldn't be prepared to give him another chance? Because on many other factors, if you look at that draw, I know he's got Neal in his quarter, so this is UK Championship, all the best players there. There are dangers everywhere, but essentially he's going to avoid the big two, potentially till the final, and all those positives you mentioned. And now all of a sudden, actually, can you argue that at least the silver lining of an early exit? Could we imagine that in a week and a half, 2 weeks' time, he's saying, well, look, the best thing that could have happened to me was going out of the Northern Ireland Open early because it's meant I could get myself ready for this, have a couple of days off and go again?
Yeah, I'm absolutely subscribed to that. I was a little bit worried about Mark actually after his first round match. He didn't play so well in Northern Ireland. I was sort of thinking along the lines of if he has a deep run here, is it going to catch up with him as well at the UK? But like you say, a few days off might really suit now. He's got a pretty good looking draw. And he went out early last year at the UK. I think he went out early the year before as well. But the point I would make is, generally speaking, he's playing a lot better now. He's in a lot better form, and I think he's better equipped to cope with that. I mean, obviously, as we saw last night, things can happen and you can bump into a tartar if you like. But he'd be on my radar. Absolutely, a few days off might just prove absolutely ideal for him.
It did strike me that a lot of your players who are probably on your radar or in some way or another are in this top section. So actually getting through them and working out which ones are, getting the timing right, I suppose, is the big challenge of snooker punting anyway, given that the dynamics of the sport don't really shift. But we've got in that first quarter Ding, and we've got Mark Allen, who obviously is playing really well right now, and John Higgins as well. So 3 big ones there. Whoever comes out of that quarter, they should be nice and battle hardened and set well to go and win the semi-final.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you probably would say Mark's definitely playing the better snooker of those 3 guys we've mentioned there. You probably fancy him to get out of that quarter. But I don't think John's a million miles behind. And then if you want to go for the old, let's get with someone who might be peaking at the right time, I'd say Ding looks to me like he's about to peak at the right time. It's a fascinating quarter, is that one. He'll certainly take some winning. But I remember speaking to John Higgins at the World Championship about draws, and he just said, rip it up. Everyone spends so long looking at these snooker draws and trying to plot paths, and he says it never, ever works out that way. You can just rip it up.
Good. We'll speak in January then.
So, but no, look, I suppose the point to make is if you've got a strong feeling, maybe don't get too hung up on the draw. I think if you fancied Mark Allen, for example, you'd look at that draw and think, oh, I don't like that. I might look elsewhere. But look, if he's playing as well as he appears to be playing and you fancy him, I wouldn't let it massively put you off. He's going to have to be the best to win the thing anyway.
I think that's a fair point. And actually, if you took Allen and dropped him into any of those 4 quarters, which one would you say? Well, that looks really nice. You could actually argue with Ding not being at his best for all that. There's definitely been some good signs. You'd actually argue that top quarter is where you want to be. You've got Jack Lazowski who's out of form, and quarter 2 you've got Selby and Robertson. Quarter 3 you've got Judd, haven't you? And then quarter 4 you got Ronnie. So I think if you're going to land anywhere in the draw, in the top half, no bad thing. Just a word on Jan then, because he was the one I'm going to put him forward as my, I'm not qualified to offer such advice really, but I wonder whether he is in a difficult quarter with Mark Selby, Neal Robertson, Barry Hawkins, who I know we've talked about before, maybe coming back to some kind of form and always a threat over a longer format. certainly a name you wouldn't rule out. But Jan, I sort of looked and had a dig around with his form. And yeah, you're right. He's not really kicked on from last year in this tournament where he looked like he might even be the man to beat. Obviously won a ranking title, I think, in Riga earlier in the season. Still a teenager at the time. And I think most people say of these young Chinese players following the Ding path, he's probably the most complete. But I looked at the players who've beaten this year, and they're not. They're all from the upper echelons, if you like. He's been losing to Mark Selby. He's lost to John Higgins, I think. So I could make a case for Jan at a big price. I think he's 40-1. And in terms of Robertson and Selby, he did beat Robertson 6-1 in this last year. Now, obviously, that was in York at the Barbican, and now we're in Milton Keynes. I don't know how much it's worth, but to know he's been there and done it in a Triple Crown event against probably the favourite for this section, I think is in his favour. So he was for me, and actually I like Ding as well, I have to say. I thought it was interesting. I don't know if you saw during the coverage of Northern Ireland, he came to the studio and chatted, and Ronnie was there, and they had a talk about how his season had gone and stuff. And he did say he found it really hard that he has to get up at 6 in the morning if he wants to chat to his family on FaceTime. And then he just goes and practices all day. And it actually seemed to me like he had found it hard, but he was beginning to adjust. And it does mean he spent a heck of a lot of time practicing. So, yeah, I can see a good tile defence from him. Clearly, he's on your shortlist as well.
Yeah, I think sort of the final point to add to Ding. I mean, you wouldn't have had him on your radar last year, and I know it was a strange UK with Judd going early, but Ding still had to beat Ronnie to get there, to get to the final, and he was magnificent in that defeat of Stephen Maguire in the final. I'd argue that he probably comes into this year's UK in a bit better form. Who knows? He could end up having a really deep run at the Northern Ireland Open. I think he's probably in a bit better shape this year. Because, as he said himself in that interview, he's playing more matches because he's here. He hasn't got a choice. He can't go back to China and spend some time at home. He has no choice with the current pandemic going on. I just think if you're looking for someone about to peak, he would be the one out of the players who are bubbling away that I'd say. I had someone like Barry Hawkins on my radar for this a while ago, thinking he's, when's he going to peak? When's he going to find it? And I just haven't seen enough from him yet. Whereas Ding, he looks like he's coming. So yeah, he's a big price, and I can't disagree with you about Jan. Look, it's a fascinating event, as it always is. You can make a case for plenty. Fingers crossed we just have 2 weeks cracking snooker.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the hope. I'm just going to run through a couple of the first round matches and get your opinion on them, because I think a lot of punters will look forward to having a crack at the matches over the outrights, with it being so competitive at the moment towards the top of the market. I'm sure you'll be previewing some of these, but I thought around Neal Robertson in the draw, it's quite interesting if you want to manage to watch some games, whether it's on Eurosport or the Eurosport Player. There are some really talented young players in his section. He's got Brian Choisky first, then he could play Louis Heathcote, who you talked about before. He certainly looks a player going places. He beat Brandon Sargent recently in a battle of the youngsters. And then there's Zhao Jintong as well, who I've been really impressed with lately. I think he's one of those Chinese players. I think he's 23, 24. He's really starting to put the pieces together. And even after that, you could be looking at Wan Sijun, who we've talked about. So that did look a section to be excited by, at least in terms of seeing some potential future stars there. Any banana skins for Neal against those youngsters, or do you expect him to deal with a lesson or two?
Well, I think if he played Louis Heathcote, that'd be a tough match. I thought Louis should have beaten Judd at the English Open. I think he was 3-1 ahead in that match. Probably live to regret that one. But another name I'd throw in just on that in that quarter as well. I watched Fraser Patrick play John Higgins on the Eurosport Player last night, and I was really impressed with him. John went 3-0 up, and Fraser knocked in 2 big breaks. And then John looked like he was going to win 4-2. Was in first, missed a simple pot. And Fraser came back at him hard there, and John got over the line in the end. But he looks a young talent, a young man from Northern Ireland. Yeah, there's some good players out there. I know we've had Ronnie saying this and that about the standard of coming through, but we say it all the time, but there is talent out there. Whether that turns into silverware, turns into sort of more well-rounded players, I guess only time will tell. But the talent is there. There's some dangerous players. We've seen it again at Northern Ireland this week.
So one more name for you in quarter 3. I'm sure it's one you've not spent a great deal of time studying the form, but Zhao Jianbo beat Stuart Bingham at the Northern Ireland Open, and I just noticed he's a 17-year-old Chinese player. They do speak very highly of him. And I noticed he's playing Graham Dott in the first round. I wonder whether that might be on your radar, because I know Graham's not been performing to the standards he'd like. And he's actually had a couple of very decent years, but at the moment he's just struggling a bit.
You know, Graham was, last few years, he's been rock solid. He's been one of these guys, first, second round matches, you could just have your house on him. Actually, like what Ben Wollaston, he's building a real good record actually in first, second round matches now. So he could have a tough game on his hands there. And the young Chinese guy, who I'm not even going to try and pronounce, I know Neal Folds was speaking quite highly of him when we spoke last as well. So that could be a potential banana skin from Graham. And just looking in the next match down there, actually, Andrew Higginson against James Kale. I want to give James a mention. He lost 4-3 to Ryan Day last night. Obviously, we remember him from a couple of years ago. He beat Ronnie in the first round of the World Championship. Fantastic match, played fantastically well. He's found results harder to come by since, but I've no doubt he's a fine player in the making. And he's just started to pick up a few results without having that deep run that he probably needs. So I'd really like to see James Kale have a good run in York. He beat Mark Selby, I think, in the first round here, the last year or the year before. I maybe beat Dave Gilbert last year. But he's a player on my radar, maybe not from a punting point of view, but I'd like to see him do well, secure his place on the tour, and fingers crossed he can have a good run in New York.
Yeah, he's one of those names I think a lot of the big players would want to avoid actually in the first round. I'm sure they, like John Higgins said to you, they don't dwell on the draw too much, but there are certain draws that look trickier than others. You can read Rich's analysis of the first round draw and the rest of the competition on Sporting Life in the coming days, possibly before you see this video actually, but do have a look on the snooker section. We've got loads of good stuff coming up. We've got a feature by Nick Metcalf. He'll be talking about his 10 favourite UK Championship moments. He's also interviewed Stuart Bingham. Just a quick word on that, Rich. It's a great interview as ever, but Stuart's one of those, like, if you're looking at form players coming in, he's really nowhere near your radar. And actually, in some ways, that's when he's at his most dangerous. You know, he's looking to become one of the handful of players who've won all 3 Triple Crown events. And you look at his wider bank of form, you'd think that it doesn't really stack up, but clearly there's something to be said for having a player on side who is so big time and is so capable of producing those results, which he will need because he is towards the bottom of the draw here, and he's not going to win this title without beating at least 2 or 3 of the world's top 5.
Yeah, I mean, but you look at the Masters start of this year, wasn't it? You wouldn't have given him a prayer at the start of the week, and he just got on a roll and played better and better and better, and then he was absolutely fantastic in the final against Ali Carter. Ali came back at him hard in that second session, and Stuart just kept producing big break after big break. When he's hot, he's red hot. He doesn't look very hot at the moment. He looks almost freezing cold, to be honest. But I guess this is the sort of event, I think we've said it before, you can work your way into this event, you know, big draw, get a good draw to start with. I know I've just said rip the draw up, but if you can find your way into the tournament, find a little bit of form, and things go your way, then it's long enough to find some form. It's not like you're thrown straight in at the deep end. I know you got beaten the champion of champions early last week, but I mean, you're coming in there cold, you're up against top players straight away. You're onto a hiding to nothing, I guess. At least in an event like this, you can find your way. So I wouldn't be ruling him out for all on recent form. You wouldn't really give him much of a chance.
Yeah, he plays Zach Surety in the first round, and then he could face James Cahill in the second. So it's an interesting draw for Stuart, but certainly read the interview with Nick Metcalf on sportinglife.com. Also check out Neal Folds' column, in which he discusses Mark Allen and what lies ahead for him. It could well be that he arrives at the UK Championship looking for a hat-trick, which would be a big ask, as you said, Rich, with the way the schedule and the tournaments run together. But loads to come on Sporting Life in the next couple of weeks then. Hopefully we get a blockbuster semi-final between Ronnie and Judd in the UK Championship. It may well follow on from a final in the Northern Ireland Open. But Rich, I get the impression that if you were to offer one bet to our listeners / viewers here, it might actually be for the World Championships with Mr. Selby, but obviously they'll have to wait for your UK Championship advice. But there's one bet you can offer people going forward. Is it going to be Selby for the Worlds, 10-1?
Yeah, it would actually. Yeah, I was on a Zoom party a couple of weeks ago and I had too much to drink, and I think I've told all my friends that the 10-1 needed snapping up. Yeah, look, it's just.
They've obviously ignored you because it's still there. So.
Yeah, rightly so as well. No, he just looks way too big for me. I mean, I just can't believe if he maintains this kind of form, throughout the season. There's not a hope in hell he'll be 10-1 come the start of the event. And we saw this year, he came into Sheffield in the summer with no form claims, but it just spurs him on, doesn't it, really? And bar a freak Ronnie O'Sullivan, I suspect he'd be world champion right now.
Yeah, well, hopefully you can gain compensation then in April, at least to keep you on good terms with your friends at the virtual distance. We'll be back in January to discuss the Masters, I'm sure. We'll just let the snooker play out for now because we have got a hectic schedule. We've got 3 more ranking titles to dish out between now and then. In fact, it may well be 4. So we'll be back in January to discuss the Masters. Who knows what lies ahead? But in the meantime, enjoy the conclusion of the Northern Ireland Open. You can read about all of that on sportinglife.com. And then it'll be time to get stuck into the UK Championship, and we'll have wall-to-wall coverage of that.